1 Peter chapter 3, our verses are 1 through 6. Would you read along with me, please? Wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as braided hair and the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Instead, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to make themselves beautiful. They were submissive to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her master. If you have a King James, it has a lowercase l, Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Father, so grateful that in that last verse you said that we, though fearful, don't need to give in. But you acknowledge that we often are. And this is one of those Bible studies where fear is written all over us. Talking about submission and our inability, sometimes just our unwillingness to trust. Help us tonight to lay our bodies down as living sacrifices before your throne. You said, Lord, if you love me, you will obey me. Even in these difficult matters of submission, may we demonstrate our love through our obedience. I pray, Lord, if there's anyone here tonight who doesn't know you, if they're not yet born again, that this would be the night that they would surrender their hearts to you. The song that was just saying, your blood flows through our veins, that just gripped my heart, Lord. We're children of God because we've been purchased. We've been adopted. And it's this born-again birthright we have that you claim us. And may we hold so tightly to you in your demonstrated love for us. God, we need your help tonight. Minister to us and then through us for your glory. We love you and we thank you. It's true, we are children of God. What a great title and an even greater honor. In your most beautiful name we pray. Amen. I was trying to find something funny to start the study with, and I just couldn't do it today. I have been so melancholy all day. I'll explain why. This is a Bible study that literally changed my life, saved my life. And going through it, it sort of forced me to look back on some really, really difficult times, some shameful times in my life. At the same time, it increased my appreciation. Always the Word does that, for the love of God and for the love of a faithful wife who held on to these 6 verses when the rest of the world, including my mother, told her to divorce me, leave him. Nobody will blame you. We'll send him out. You come live with me, honey, my mom used to tell her. And while I don't do guilt over the things that I did in the past, I think you all know there are just some things that you have to revisit in your lives that are unpleasant, remind you of the beast you once were. That's the description for me. And all I can think is, Lord, you love me so much that you used a faithful wife to win my heart, and in the process, save my life. When I combine that with Sunday, will be my 29th birthday in the Lord. This has been one of those days where I just didn't have a bunch to say. All I could think was, God, thank you. You saved a wretch like me. I guess the moral of the story is let God use you to save those around you. Now, before we get into the study of the verses, I want you to understand what it would have been like in the first century church, especially in the context of tonight's study if you were a woman. People were getting saved. 3,000 men, we don't know how many wives, and children were included. A couple of days later, another 5,000. So we're thinking by now there's probably 30,000 people that claim the name of Christ. And nobody knows what to do. And the women in particular, women who had no standing in the ancient culture. Women who were expected to be submissive to their husbands, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. Suddenly they're listening to the apostles declare this wonderful word of God and talking about freedom and talking about joy in the Lord and talking about the kind of love that these women had been deprived of even in their own homes. And they would surrender their hearts to Jesus and everything would change. Imagine what it was like for them to go home and tell their husband that I met Jesus today. I gave my life to our Messiah. It was Jesus all along, and now I love him. I belong to him. And the husbands would, of course, say, I don't want any of that. We're not going to hear it in this house. Others would demand that their wives leave the home. If you love him, you don't love me. Out, they'd be told. And suddenly they're all alone out in the world, and all they have to hold on to is Jesus. So now what do we do, especially in this context? What we do with the ladies who get saved, they're married to a jerk. They go home, he acts like a jerk, and they think, well, I'm a Christian now. I don't have to put up with this. So what do we do? Peter has the answers. And most of you ladies aren't going to like the answers, but it's still the answer. Wives, in the same way. Now, the context matters. In the same way, you were told to submit to the governing authorities. In the same way that Jesus submitted to insults without retaliating, just as he suffered and didn't defend himself. He made no threats. He didn't tell anybody, look, this is what's going to happen to you if you do this. He entrusted himself into the hands of his Father. That's the same way, wives, that you are to submit to your husbands. He says, wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands. Now, I want to begin here with a difficult statement. Ladies, being submissive to your husband, believer or unbeliever, is not something you do to reward their good behavior. Over the years, I've had a lot of people say, well, I'll submit to him when he starts acting like Jesus. Or I'll submit to him when he starts treating me better. Or they'll try for a little bit of time and say, it's not changing him at all. I'm done with this. No, you're told to submit to your husbands regardless, because Jesus is the one who's asking you to do it. A Christian woman, Peter says, will be a submissive wife, not a weak wife, not a timid wife, but a submissive wife, understanding the roles. It is a fact assumed by Peter. It is also a fact that we should all be able to assume of all Christian wives. Now, again, it was necessary for Peter to write these things because of the abrupt change in their lives once coming to Christ. Once hearing that they were loved by God, what are they going to do? I'm loved by God, but I'm not loved by my husband. Paul used to say over and over and over, God, I just want my husband to love me. There were two people in Paula's life, her mother and me, who were supposed to love her, and we didn't. She didn't feel love. She didn't benefit from the love. And when she gave her heart to Christ, Jesus told her, well, I love you. I always have and I always will. Well, now, in the context of these unequally yoked marriages, these women were finding out how valuable they were to God, how loved they were by Him. Further, in the ancient world, it was customary for a wife, remember, she had no standing. It was customary for her to believe whatever her husband believed or told her to believe. Wives and children didn't get a voice. So if a wife would go and say, I'm a Christian, he could say, no, you're not. And the wife is saying, okay, what am I supposed to do in a situation like this? Should I leave my pagan heathen husband? I included that because I'm sure some of you ladies have asked God the same question. Peter is simply supplying the answer to a very common question of the day. Now let me take just a very brief 1-minute detour here. I want you to know that the Bible has the answers to any and every question you'll ever confront in your life. There's nothing that you do, there's no decision you're going to make, no direction that God is going to ask you to take without Him validating it in the Word. The answer, either very specifically or in general, is going to be given to you. Peter is the one supplying the answer. Now, final comment before moving on here. The King James, and this is important, adds the word own to this passage, and it is appropriate. Wives, submit to your own husbands. We Christians get a lot of flack in this world. Well, you're sexist and you don't care about women, and none of that is true. There are only two places where God commends submission: wives to their husbands, and it's only to their own husbands. This speaks nothing at all about the world that we live in, the government that we have. The two places, the church of Jesus Christ, He's the head of the church, and it is patriarchal in its setup. But the same thing is true of a Christian home. There can only be one head, for better or worse, and it depends on who you're married to, ladies. For better or worse, your husband is the spiritual head of the house. And there's no way to work around that. There's no loophole or escape clause. There's no way to maneuver or manipulate things to get them your way and be in the will of God. Male headship is a principle for the Church of Jesus Christ in the home only. No other place are you asked to submit to male headship simply because they're men. That matters a great deal. Now, why is all this important? Well, we've talked about it already in this chapter, or in the last chapter rather, but remember, submission always has a mission. And that mission is winning souls. Here's the so that. Here's the why. So that if any of them do not believe the word, you're married to an unbeliever, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. Now, there are a lot of times in our walk with Jesus when we feel like God is asking us to do things that are unfair. Paula, as God's sovereignty would have it, she might have thought at the time as bad luck would have it, she didn't understand very much about the Bible before I got saved. You know, she attended church. She went on a Friday because that was the only time that it didn't interfere with my schedule. It wasn't even a very good Bible teaching church. But one day, as the Lord was sort of ministering to her hurting heart, she came across the prophecy of Malachi. I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel. And when she read that, it was like she was a Bible scholar all of a sudden. She understood it. She got it. And it was like, why is this the one thing I understand? I'm married to this jerk. He's breaking my heart every day. And you're telling me that you love him? And then God said, not only that, but you say you love me. If you love me, you have to love what I love and hate what I hate. I hate divorce. and I love your husband. And so she understood it. So why would God ask her to do something that seems so unfair? Here's the answer. It's that I might be won over. That I might be won over without words. That's the mission that God has given us. Now, God's plan is a good one. You see, God's plan in having wives submit to even unbelieving husbands is the same purpose he had in submitting to the cross when Jesus did it for you and for me. It's simply to win the lost. Nearly everything that we do in this Christian life ought to be about that one thing. We always need to be aware that people are watching. We need to be aware that everywhere we go, there are people who are listening, people who are saved and unsaved, and we need to be aware of our witness, and we need to be men and women who rightly represent Jesus. Winning the lost is the mission of the church. Now, my role as your pastor is to equip the saints. That's you for the work of ministry. Well, what's the work of ministry? To go out and win people. To tell the people that you really care about, not only the people that you pray for, but the people you care enough about to tell them the truth about Jesus Christ. That's why the Apostle Paul said, I pray to Philemon, I pray that you'll be active in sharing your faith, so that you'll have a full understanding of every good thing that we have in Christ. In other words, as I've said to you many times, if you aren't sharing, you don't get it. And this is just your role in winning the lost. Now remember, especially if you're here and you're in the middle of the pain of an unequally yoked marriage, I am aware that others of you are married to professing Christians. And by the way, all of these principles work the other way around as well. But if you're married to somebody who isn't behaving like a Christian, you're in pain. And God says, I got the answer for the pain. What's the answer for the pain? Submit to him. Nobody wants to do that. Paula, one time she was teaching at a women's conference. And before she left, she said, is it okay if I tell him something? I said, well, sure, just whatever. No, I want to ask you first. And I said, okay, what is it? She said, can I tell the ladies that I hate submitting to? I said, of course you can. Nobody likes it. But you do it as a living sacrifice. And you do it because you want your husband saved. It's really important. Everything that we do here at Calvary Chapel, but I think more in the context of the study, everything that we do in our lives individually is for this one reason. The reason Paula reads to me is that we can go out and win people. The reason that she goes places with me, she drives me everywhere, is we want to talk to people about Jesus whenever we get the opportunity. That needs to be our mission. And Jesus said, my secret weapon in this mission is submission. He wants you to do this difficult thing, to turn you into an evangelist. And he does it at the expense of your own comfort. If you have an unbelieving husband, or if your husband's a jerk, again, it works the other way around as well. Isn't it true that you have prayed for him or her a lot? Now, your motive may be wrong. It may be, okay, Lord, I'm praying, I want him saved because I want my life to be easier. But God will deal with your heart. It took Paula 10 years to let God deal with her heart on that issue. But here's the key. You're praying for somebody, and God is saying to you, I want to answer your prayer. I really want to answer your prayer. And we think, oh, good, oh, good, oh, good. And he says, okay, I want to use you to do it. Here. Who wants to do that? God says, I want to use you. Here's an important principle that you've heard me mention many times. Before you pray about anything or anyone, be willing to be the one God uses to accomplish the answer to your prayer. Why isn't God answering my prayers? He's trying to. But in this particular context only now, remember we're talking about wives submitting to their unbelieving husbands. Here's how you'll win your unbelieving husband. Verse 2. when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Now, in the previous verse, Peter said that words were not the weapon women should use for conversion. Now, we like a good argument. We like a debate. We want to convince. We want to persuade. But Peter says words aren't the weapon. Your lifestyle is. I've known a lot of women in our years here who tried to talk their husbands into heaven. Others who tried to shame their husbands into heaven. Make them feel really, really guilty. But it simply doesn't work. What will work is the peaceful, joyful heart of a wife, because it is a powerful weapon in God's arsenal. It's a beautiful thing, especially for people who have no peace in their lives. Now, I can't help but talk a little bit about our situation. But all those years Paula was praying for me, I had no peace. I had no joy. I was being just ripped apart. And I wasn't even aware of the battle that I was in. Paula and others were praying for me. God was sort of taking me through the spiritual meat grinder. And I remember I was such a jerk. I did the best I could to make Paula's life a living hell. And the one thing I couldn't take from her, now she wasn't always at peace. Over the years as she prayed for me, I would see more and more peace. And I wonder, well, why is she acting like that? But the one thing that was like a nuclear weapon that God used on me was her joy. I couldn't steal her joy. And believe me, I tried. I was a control freak. And I tried so hard to steal her peace. I tried to make her afraid. I tried to do anything and everything I could just to prove to her that I was really the one in charge here. And no matter what I did, I couldn't steal her peace. And that was the most powerful message she ever preached to me. And she preached it day after day after day. In my most desperate moments, and those desperate moments were coming the closer I got to the Lord. In my most desperate moments, I knew I needed the same peace and joy. When I fell on that public street in Upland, California, and gave my life to Jesus, I cried out not for Jesus. I didn't know anything about Jesus. I hadn't ever opened a Bible, I hadn't read it. But I knew that the Jesus Paula believed in was powerful. And I cried out, and here's my exact words: if you're real, I need Paula's Jesus. And it was because I couldn't steal her joy. Your lifestyle, ladies, is what will win people. The same thing is true in principle for the rest of us, the people that work with you, the people who are family members that you're praying for. If your life is filled with joy, if your life is filled with peace, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. It doesn't mean that you're not afraid. But in the middle of those things that you're afraid of, there's still this peace that's palpable, peace that other people can watch, even though they don't understand it. The people that you're praying for will see it, and they'll give their life to Jesus Christ when they find themselves in trouble. So that was the weapon that God used. And then things began to change. I began to change. You see, there was something else I began noticing about Paula. He says in verse 3, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as braided hair and the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Instead, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. Now, one of the things that I began to notice was how beautiful Paula was. Now, I'd always known that. You've heard our story about the moment we met. She opened the door and we were in love, and I'd seen her a week before from across a gym, and she took my breath away. So I always thought she was beautiful, but in my sin and the harder my heart became, I'd forgotten that. I just got used to seeing her, and I didn't see her beauty anymore. All I could see were the things that bothered me, the things that irritated me. And even those things weren't her fault. It was just all the ugliness that was going on in my heart. Now, Paula has always, to me, been stunningly beautiful physically. But because of the ugliness, the hardness of my heart, I just stopped noticing. There were times, and this is one of those shameful things that I've been dealing with today. There were times when I thought the answer to all my problems was I'll just get a new wife. I can't say with any definity that the worst thing I ever said to her was this, but I think the worst thing I ever said to her. She said one day, "What do you want from me?" I said, "I want you to obey me." She reminded me she wasn't my dog. But at the same time, she didn't get angry at me. She just ran to Jesus. And I thought, well, this is the woman, if I get rid of her, I'll get somebody else. And then everything will be okay. But that day when I got saved, and when I say that day, I don't mean it took 2 months or it took 6 months or eventually it happened. That day, when I went home and she didn't know anything that happened, I looked at her again and she was the most beautiful girl on the face of the earth. And all I could think is, what happened here? And what happened was God gave me new life. He gave me new eyes. He gave me a new heart. And what really happened was I was experiencing some of that peace that she's been demonstrating in my home for all of those years, those difficult years. Her beauty, her peace, her joy. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Paula has never been a quiet spirit. But what a beautiful, joyful spirit she's always been. She has always been a light wherever she goes. I walk into a room and I turn the lights out. She walks into a room and the lights come back on because that's who she's always been. And I could finally really understand and appreciate who she was, who God had made her. Her beauty has always been unfading because that beauty came from within. Again, physically, I think she's stunning. But it's Jesus in her that puts the whole package together. I want you to look again at verse 3 because I want every one of you to understand what this verse really says and how Peter is using it. He is not saying that women should not be physically attractive. He is not saying that outward adornment, makeup, jewelry, nice clothes, fixed up hair, what else? None of that is wrong. That's not the point. To read it this way is to miss the point at all. What he's saying, the point he wants us to really get is to remember, and I want to be sensitive here, but we all need to remember that physical beauty fades. I have one person in my life that thinks I'm really handsome. And that's Paula. And she tells me all the time. Truth is, when I look in a mirror and I see the face dragging and I see the wrinkles, I just think, Lord, thank you that she sees me that way. Every one of us has to deal with the fact that physical beauty fades. And a lot of times, as that physical beauty is fading as we age, it's the source of a lot of insecurity. But if the beauty comes from within, Paul says, outwardly we're wasting away day by day, but inwardly we are being renewed in the Spirit of God. Here's the thing, if your beauty comes from inside, then it's a beauty that never fades. And it enhances everything about your physical appearance. And then with those eyes that Jesus gives you, with that heart that he gives you, You're going to be convinced that you're the luckiest person in the world to be married to who you're married to because, well, look how beautiful she is. Look how handsome he is. But you see, we got to see him with God's heart. And that just isn't possible when inside we're not beautiful. When I read this passage, I'm always reminded of my absolute hatred for legalism. Over the years, we've seen many, many women who have been trapped in legalistic churches. They won't cut their hair, the 1 Corinthians passage. They won't use makeup. They're told they got to wear dresses down to the floor. And I hate legalism because that misses the point of this passage altogether. To misuse or to misunderstand this verse causes a lot of pain. So I want to say it. I want to say it as clearly as I can. It is not a sin. There is nothing wrong with fixing yourselves up, ladies. Nothing. And by the way, we men could use some fixing up too. You know, we need to be, and I'm not going to do a marriage retreat here. But you know, we need to be clean. We need to smell good, men. We need to bathe, shower before we say, come here, honey. And we've got to take care of ourselves. Fix yourselves up. Don't be rude. Don't do gross things. She's the woman I want to look at me with love in her heart, and I'm not going to belch in front of her. It's okay to fix yourself up. J. Vernon McGee used to say, if the barn door needs painting, paint it. And it's a good thing. It's a fine thing. I used to say all the time, and say, you know, Paula is so beautiful, and she doesn't wear any makeup at all. And she would drag me in, and she would say, I wear makeup. And yet, I never see her put it on, and I just think that's that natural beauty that I see. So I'm assuming she's telling me the truth, but that's okay. You know, Paula, when she gets dressed for church, she asks me if this is okay. Not because I'm going to tell her, nope, don't like that outfit. No, she just wants to please me. That's the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. If we would read the Bible and enjoy the freedom God has given us, so much pain would be spared. Is there a biblical standard for women's dress? The answer is yes. That standard is modesty. 1 Timothy chapter 2, beginning in verse 9, it says, I want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, not with braided hair, gold or pearls, or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. Again, this does not preclude braided hair or jewelry. It simply minimizes their importance relative to the inward beauty and peace of a gentle and quiet spirit. Paul is simply saying, relatively speaking, when he's talking to the Corinthians, just like when he talks about physical exercise being of little value, he didn't say there's no value, but being of little value compared to spiritual training. He and Peter are just using an argument from the lesser to the greater so that we understand what he's saying. Paula's beauty always came from within. It's her own personal Jesus style, and it's really attractive. And that's what I learned after all those years of being so ugly. My ugliness didn't cramp her peace and her beauty. And that's really important because not all of us are in ideal situations. If you want to be precious to God, you want to be beautiful in and out, men and women, cultivate a gentle, quiet spirit, because those are the things that are precious to God. Sadly, our world sends exactly the opposite message. Verse 5 says, "For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to make themselves beautiful. They were submissive to their own husbands." Now, I often say that there's nothing new in all of history. Well, Peter is emphasizing that here. He's saying the command to be submissive is the same as it's always been. God is sometimes irritatingly consistent. And this is the way it's always been, way back in the garden after the fall. Eve, your desire will be for your husband. The word desire there in Hebrew is a word that says your desire, we would say in English, your desire is to rule your husband, but he will rule over you. That's a consequence of the fall. That's why Paul could say, can I tell him it's okay if I don't like to submit? But you do it for Jesus, and when we do the hard thing for Jesus, it's so pleasing to him. He looks down from heaven and thinks, oh, she really loves me. She trusts me. That's what Peter is trying to communicate. The faithful women of times past were asked to continue to submit to their husbands, not because their husbands were worth submitting to, but because Jesus submitted to the will of his Father and asked us to do it for him. And the example that he uses is Sarah, verse 6. Like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her master, or the lowercase l, Lord, that was simply an ancient world sign of respect. You know, Paula doesn't call me Lord. She doesn't call me her master. But she respects me. She respects me, and she demonstrates it all the time. Now, at this point, there should be a question wandering around in your head and in your heart. And the question is, how can anyone submit to an unbelieving husband when he's as bad as Pastor Ron was, or when he's as bad as my husband is? The answer is simple. Follow Sarah's example. You think it was easy for her? You know, it's one of the things that we do is we say, well, she was married to Abraham, the father of her faith. This is a man who tried to give her away twice to save his own skin. Now, here's something to really think about. Sarah was so drop-dead gorgeous in her old age. From the year 75 on, she was so beautiful that Abraham knew that if he took her to Egypt, and he did, that Pharaoh was going to try to steal her and bring her into his harem. He says, they'll just kill me and they'll do it. And so he said, tell him you're my sister. A half-truth, which is a whole lie. And one night, Pharaoh woke up covered with boils from head to toe. Now, we'd like to think that Abraham learned his lesson. Oh, I'm sorry, God, I won't ever do anything like that again. But it happened again with Abimelech. Now, God didn't cover him with boils. He just gave him a really, really bad dream. And he woke up, had nothing to do with it, and showered him with gifts. But the idea is, Sarah saw the hand of God protect her. Now, this is really important. It might be the most important thing that I say tonight. She could only do that by trusting God herself. Now, we know Sarah had her issues as well. All I have to do is say Hagar. But she trusted God. That was the characteristic of her life. She trusted God. The only way Paula could have stayed with me praying for those 13 years was trusting God. And she had no evidence that God was doing anything. In one of her journal entries, she wrote, I'm doing my part. Where are you? And why aren't you doing your part? That was her challenge to God. But she trusted him enough that when he said, stay there, I've got something special. She was obedient. That's exactly what Sarah did. She placed her faith, her trust in God. Ladies, no matter how big a jerk your husband is, you can trust God. You do your part. I promise you God will do his part. You may have to go through a lot of pain like Paula did. It's certainly not going to happen overnight. But it will happen over one night eventually, and that'll be the night that he gets saved. And you'll see the power of God in your lives. And too often we want to do something, get an immediate return from it. This isn't working, God. I can't do it anymore. No, just trust him. Be in it for the long haul. Remember, we are living sacrifices. And if you really understand that, if you'll commit to trusting him, you'll be able to see the hand of God move. The one thing Paula can never deny is the supernatural power of God. The day I got saved, the last thing that Paula ever thought was going to happen that day was that I was going to meet Jesus and our entire lives would be changed. But she trusted. She trusted. Now let me talk to the husbands. We're going to talk to the husbands in our study next time as well. But men, your wives need and they deserve for us to be consistent in our walks with Jesus. Consistently kind, consistently loving, consistently faithful. Not saying one thing and doing another thing. Not doing something well for a short period of time and then going off the deep end again. But being consistent in our walk with Jesus. Trust doesn't come easily, and your consistency will help your wife to trust God. And then you'll be the beneficiary of that trust. The enemy will attack our wives with ferocity if we are inconsistent, and that'll make it harder for them to trust him. And our job, men, is to make it easier for our wives to trust the Lord. We can help our wives trust the Lord by being trustworthy ourselves. Again, next week is going to be next to the men. Let's close this passage. Peter says, you are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. I'm so grateful that this short section ended like this, because fear is a fact of life. Jason and the group, they ended tonight with song, dealing with fear. I wish I could say you won't be afraid if you trust God, but you will. Fear is normal. But if you want to be like Sarah, don't give in to the fear. It's real. You need to acknowledge it. You need to take it before the Lord and say, I'm afraid. I know I don't need to be afraid, but I'm afraid. It's okay. God understands all of that. But you don't give in to fear. Sarah didn't give in to fear following Abraham. Don't you give in to fear. Don't you give in to intimidation. We unbelieving jerks of husbands, at least it was true in our home, we try to use intimidation, manipulation I did to try to make Paul afraid. I just wanted to stop with this Jesus thing. I just wanted to leave me alone. And so I would try to intimidate her. And I did, but she never stopped. Now, I'm not all that as a catch, but can you imagine the crowns awaiting Paula when we get to heaven? Can you imagine as we stand before the Lord, he's going to say, Ron, let's see how you did with Paula. His name for her, as you know, is Precious. Let's see how you did with Precious. And he's going to say, well, I've got this crown, I've got this crown, I've got this crown. And the way I picture it in my mind is that I'm going to be just behind or trying to juggle all of these crowns, and he's not going to say a word about me or to me. He's just going to say, this is for you. You were afraid, but you didn't give in. I asked you to stick it out, and you did. And look at the result. If she would have left me, we wouldn't be here today. The most meaningful 29 years of my life would be wiped out. Would I have gotten saved? Eventually, probably. Who knows? But look at what we'd have missed out on. It's okay to be afraid. It's just not okay ever to give in to fear. I'll close with this statement in context. It matters a great deal. Obeying God by submitting to your husband requires great faith. Ask him for it. Be obedient. And then watch the power of the Holy Spirit come upon you. And what you'll find is that God is truly faithful. God is truly faithful. Learn, as Sarah did, that you can trust God even if you're married to a man who tries to give you away. That's what faith is all about. Husbands, next week is for you. Would you pray with me? Do we have the men and women from the pastor's class coming up? Well, Father, we thank you tonight. I love these really practical studies.